So hello, good morning. I'm Anna Tomčić. I'm part of the Free Psych Collective. And this morning I will be talking about Melitta Schmideberg's work with offenders in psychoanalytic free clinics. Because, as not many people know, this is what Schmideberg was doing for most of her life. So, this is Melitta Schmideberg. And today, if people know Schmideberg's work at all, what they know her as is Klein's rebel daughter. So what Schmideberg is mostly remembered for is the so-called controversial discussions that took place at the British Psychoanalytical Society in the early 1940s. And during these discussions, Schmideberg famously opposed her mother, so she spoke against Klein and her methods, and a lot has been written about this. However, other than Klein's rebel daughter, Schmideberg was also a socially engaged original analyst who devoted most of her life to working with marginalized people. So she helped to found two institutes for the psychological treatment of offenders, one of which was in the UK and the other one in the USA. In both of these institutes, Schmideberg worked mostly with borderline psychotic and antisocial patients, a lot of them from very deprived backgrounds, and she devised her own methods for working with these patient groups. Schmideberg started her career by working at the Berlin Polyclinic. This was the first ever free psychoanalytic clinic in Europe. And later on, after she moved to the UK, she helped to found the Institute for the Scientific Treatment of Delinquency, as it was then called, and this would later become the Portman Clinic of the Tavistock and Portman in London. Afterwards, Schmideberg moved to the USA, to New York, and there, together with her colleague Jack Sokol, she founded the Association for the Psychiatric Treatment of Offenders, short the APTO. And not very much is known about the APTO in psychoanalytic history at all. So the APTO was a group of volunteer analysts, psychiatrists, and psychologists who treated patients for free in their private offices. And the frequency of sessions ranged from 1 to 3 sessions a week. However, the group also organized lectures, public lectures and meetings for social workers, correctional staff, and anyone else who was interested. And this was very much in line with the tradition of the other free clinics at the time. So all free clinics that were started in Europe in the 1920s, early 1930s had a public aspect. One of the methods established by Schmideberg and her colleagues at the APTO was so-called group therapy in reverse. So what Schmideberg and her colleagues found was that neither individual nor group therapy provided sufficient support for the patients who were referred to them. So, and this was because the patient's daily life, so the struggles they had to face in their daily life, would always interfere with the therapeutic process. So Schmideberg and her colleagues invented a method called group therapy in reverse. What did this mean? So basically, rather than one therapist working with a group of patients, here a team of people was employed to help a single individual. So a team of people would work therapeutically with the individual patient until they were able to build such a group of supportive relationships for themselves. So patients were analyzed, but they were also assisted in finding jobs, a place to live, and help was provided with practical problems such as paperwork, for example. So the aim was to utilize the impact of as many therapeutically oriented persons as possible. So there was a real network of care that was formed around the individual patient. In terms of time, a lot of Schmideberg's patients were unable to adapt themselves to social norms, and so they would regularly miss appointments. But this was tolerated. It was taken as a matter of course. So sessions were prolonged or shortened if this was possible for the therapist and if the patient felt there was a need for it. And additional sessions were offered in crisis situations. In terms of space, Schmideberg warned that a quiet or impersonal consulting room only makes a frightened patient still more uneasy. So instead, she tried to emulate a relaxed and homely atmosphere. So she would pop into the kitchen during sessions. Sometimes she did needlework while she talked. She avoided staring at the patient and definitely did not take notes during sessions. In terms of money, it is important to stress that all patients in these institutions were treated free of charge. So the Berlin Polyclinic, the ISTD, and the APTO were all institutions that provided a public service. So the money came from the state, from charitable sources, or from private individuals sometimes, but not from the patient's own pocket. And in spite of everything that has been said about the role of money in the therapeutic process in psychoanalysis, Schmideberg believed that this was really key. So in her article on reassurance, which is a very worthwhile read, she said, I believe that with most patients, a deep analysis is possible only if they are sure that the analyst treats them not merely for their fees and would not stop if the patient could not afford them any longer. And this, of course, is related to the question of transference. So a number of analysts in the interwar and post-World War II period who worked with antisocial children and adults emphasized how difficult it was to establish a positive transference or a trusting relationship. And in order to achieve this, many were willing to bend the rules of traditional psychoanalysis quite significantly. So this was not just Schmideberg by any means, but Schmideberg's methods were very much a part of this trend. So what did this look like in practice? Well, Schmideberg was willing to lend the patient books if they were interested, to accept small presents without analyzing the action. She went to see a patient's lecture. She visited another patient in hospital. She offered extra sessions if the patient was struggling. She did not require the patient to lie on the couch, did not reproach them if they didn't keep to the rule of free association or if they just avoided talking about something. And in therapy, she behaved fairly spontaneously and did not attempt to hide personal matters of little importance. Reassurance is a topic Schmideberg wrote a lot about, and here her methods were directly opposed to Klein's. So Klein argued that techniques based on reassurance are seldom successful and that they are there to assuage the analyst's needs rather than the patient's. In contrast to this, Schmideberg argued that with very anxious patients, reassurance actually makes it possible for the patient to accept an interpretation. So in her article on reassurance, she wrote, I believe that under unfavorable conditions, even correct interpretations will have unfavorable effects. A very inhibited boy was told by his mother that he avoided work to make her upset. This correct interpretation only increased his anxiety and inhibition. So the analyst's reassurance and non-retaliation actually enables the patient to gain trust and to let the interpretations affect them on a deeper level. And here we have to keep in mind that Schmideberg did a lot of her work with very anxious, very troubled patients. And in this context, reassurance becomes important. Obviously, Schmideberg spent most of her life working with working class patients. And in the aftermath of the Curtis Report on the conditions of children in care in 1946, Schmideberg wrote a book called Children in Need. This was published in 1948. It is not very well known today, but it offered a lot of practical advice to improve not just the living conditions, but also the psychological conditions of children in care. And in the preface to the book, Edward Glover recognized the huge role that class played in Schmideberg's work. So this is a quote from the preface. In the past, too many books have been written by psychologists, or for that matter, psychoanalysts, whose practice has been confined to the middle and leisured classes, and whose vision has, in consequence, been contracted. Being concerned mainly with the hidden causes of maladjustment, they tend to neglect the social factors which must be taken into account if any large-scale measures are to be brought to fruition. So for Schmideberg, there was no way of approaching the patient's psyche without taking into account the wider social context of their life, as well as the wider social context of their family. And this influenced Schmideberg's theoretical approach to psychoanalysis as well. So I hope by this point you are interested in Melitta Schmideberg's work. And if you want to read more about Melitta Schmideberg, do look for my article in the latest issue of Psychoanalysis and History. That is volume 26, issue 3. Thank you for listening.